Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keith Melville and this is my wife Angela. It gives me great pleasure for us to have a film done on Sunbury, and we hope that you will enjoy it. What roams the courtyard of Sunbury House when the night draws its curtain of black? What makes the visitor leave so soon, vowing to never come back?
During the peak of the sugar revolution, Sunbury House was built around 1660 by the hands of artisan slaves, owned by Matthew Chapman, who is the son of Thomas Chapman, one of the first settlers on the island. Thomas was related to the Earl of Carlisle, and through this association was granted lands in Barbados. Thomas was married to Mary Cleggett, and they had 3 children, John, Matthew, and Richard, all owning lands in the parish of St. Philip. Matthew married Isabella, and they had 8 children, 2 of whom married into Quaker families. The Quakers owned many of the neighboring plantations. A 1674 map shows the Chapman plantation operating with a cattle mill. Matthew purchased land from the neighboring small farmers and joined it to his own, thus enlarging his plantation.
Why are the servants long gone before the sun slips away? What feeds on the darkness that follows? Would it help keep you safe if you pray?
After Matthew's death, the plantation was sold to Nathaniel Branker. Nathaniel married Anne Carter. The Carters owned a small amount of land next to the plantation. The marriage possibly added these lands onto the existing plantation, as to this day there are fields on the plantation called Carters. As custom in these days, the plantation changed its name to the surname of its owner and was known as Brankers until 1763. At this point in time, James Butler Harris and his wife Elizabeth became the 3rd owners. It was during the Harris ownership in 1766 that the bell was erected in the Bell House at Sunbury. James Butler Harris was a great friend and possibly family to John and George Barrow. They were negotiating the sale of Sunbury when James died. It was stated in his will that the estate and contents be sold to the Barrow brothers. The sale was finalized in 1775. The Barrow family lived at Sunbury from 1775 until 1835. For that time, the plantation was called Brothers Plantation until they renamed it Sunbury, after their home in Kent, England. John Henry Barrow married Frances Mayers of the nearby Halton Plantation in 1764. John Henry planted the first teak tree on the island in 1799. He also planted a grove of 300 mahogany trees, the first to be introduced to the island, of over which half remain today. Notes in Senhouse Diary of 1777 describe Sunbury as having a garden resembling that of the St. Michael Cathedral in its layout.
You read a page from the Bible like so many times before. There's a noise out of the back of the stables as the horses grow restless once more. Why do the hounds bay ever so loud? Their cries to be heard far and near. What makes them uneasy when darkness descends? In their cages they whimper in fear.
The Great Hurricane of 1780 damaged the roof of the house. A young son of the Barrows was also killed during the hurricane, smothered by his father, who was trying to protect him. His grave still remains in the northeast garden of Sunbury Plantation today. Bailey's plantation was another plantation a relatively short distance from Sunbury. Bussa, a slave at Bailey's plantation, was a head ranger, who was a trusted worker in the eyes of the plantation owners. He was considered a leading member of the black elite within slave society. Bussa led the slave uprising in 1816 despite his stature, feeling an obligation to lead his fellow man, who were treated more like beasts of burden than man. The outbreak of extensive arson, which signified the start of the rebellion, began around 8:30 p.m. on April 14, 1816, in the southeastern parish of St. Philip. From 15 plantations across Barbados, each having its own group leader, fighting, looting, and arson broke out around Barbados. The leader at Sunbury was a driver named King William, a friend and co-conspirator of Bussa. The rebellion was short-lived. Within 4 days, it was effectively squashed by a joint offensive of the local militia and imperial troops garrisoned on the island. Martial law was imposed from approximately 2 p.m. on April 15th for 89 days. During this time, King William was caught, arrested, tried, and executed. Sunbury sustained almost £4,000 in damage from the rebellion, inflation adjusted, roughly £50,000 today. Primarily, this was caused by arson, perhaps an early premonition for the fate of the building. In 1985, 169 years after his rebellion, the Emancipation Statue in honor of Bussa, created by Carl Brudhagen, was unveiled in Haggett Hall in the parish of St. Michael. In 1998, the Parliament of Barbados named Bussa as one of the 10 national heroes of Barbados.
What roams the courtyard of Sunbury House? Why is the room at the top so cold? What terrible secret lies behind within these walls some 3 centuries old?
In the 1880s, Alastair Cameron, a Scotsman, came to Barbados to work for the Daniels. He married Laura Susanna Roop, a niece of Thomas Daniel. Alastair and Laura had 5 children. Their only son, Alastair, died a young man, apparently from war injuries. 2 spinster sisters, Helen and Frances, lived at Sunbury House after their father died. All the properties, Sunbury and Hampton, were left to an English niece who, having no interest in Barbados, put the estate up for sale.
Does it wait at the top of the stairway? You wonder each step that you take. You dread its cloak, the darkness of night, and you pray that the dawn would soon break.
Sunbury House was divided from the plantation and sold to Mr. and Mrs. Keith Melville. The balance of their sugar lands were sold to Mr. Geoffrey Armstrong, who had been their attorney for the estates for many years, like his grandfather. When Keith and Angela Melville first looked at the old house, they fell in love with it right away. Sadly, it had been neglected during the Cameron ladies' latter years, but the house inside was just as it had been possibly 100 years ago. After many repairs, the Melvilles moved in, and they lived at Sunbury until 1984. At this time, their enthusiasm for collecting the island's heritage had taken over their home. They moved back into their first home, Little Bentley, and Sunbury was opened to the public in 1984, with all the rooms viewable to the public. In 1995, the Melvilles were out of the island when a disastrous fire struck Sunbury House. With the amount of old beams and wood parieties, the house burnt very quickly. The carriage collections and artifacts in the cellar were saved as the fire burnt the first and second floor. It was a devastating time for the Melvilles, but within 6 months, and with the encouragement and financial assistance of dedicated Barbadians and friends, work began on restoring Sunbury. No effort was spared in its refurbishment. Some of the collections of furniture from Sunbury that had been sold and left the island for Florida 16 years earlier were returned to Sunbury.
What roams the courtyard near the old well, and fades by the silk cotton trees? It's some soul long tormented, whose burden no one can see. The mist and the wind, you say to yourself, that's what it is, and you're sure, yet come night you'll find you're hidden behind closed shutters and locked doors.